Here we are at the start of the 2025 Spinnaker Cup. This is a race from San Francisco Bay to Monterey Bay. It's about 85 miles long and has a variety of different sailing conditions along the way. Usually it's fairly light in the mornings here in the summertime in San Francisco. You get out the gate and turn left, and you're on a bit of a reach for most of the way down to Pilar Point, which is also where Maverick's surf spot is, if that helps you place it on the map. Once you round that point, or at least get right off of the point, you're usually able to set a spinnaker. And then it's a spinnaker run from there all the way down to Monterey. And if you get there early enough, you carry the spinnaker all the way through. If you get there at 3 in the morning, as some years it's the case, you sometimes get the Monterey Bay exhale that happens in the early hours of the morning, and you end up finishing going upwind in a nice, warm 3 to 5 knots. So we just put up our number 1 jib, which has a wind range up to about 12 knots upwind, about 30 degrees apparent wind angle. We're putting that up because it's usually fairly light as you go out the gate, even as it builds within the bay. I think in this part of the morning we're at probably up to 8 knots of breeze, so it's perfect for these conditions. And this is in anticipation of us going out the gate, turning left, and then being on a somewhat beam or broad reach for the rest of the time to Pilar Point, which the number 1 is a perfect sail for. It's sort of almost like a giant Code Zero sort of sail. Our goal in this start, if we can pull it off, is to essentially win the pin. This puts us as far to the right on the line as we can possibly get, and with an outgoing tide, puts us in a good position to be able to tack out towards the right and get into favorable current. It also lends us the starboard advantage as we come into the start line, so that we aren't pushed out by any starboard boats over towards the left of the course. So while we may be ambitious in our attempt to win the pin, I would also point out that this is an 85-mile ocean race. So in terms of winning any part of the starting line, it's not absolutely vital. For example, Shake and Bake, who actually gets a piece of us here at the start line, jibes around and goes back and ends up crossing the start line a decent bit behind us and after the gun. But after 85 miles, they beat us by 2 minutes. So while it's nice to get a good start in an ocean race that's this long or longer, it's not absolutely vital that your start be perfect and that you win exactly the spot that you want on the line. If you look up to the forward right, that's a Santa Cruz 37 named Wildcard. This is one of the more closely rated boats to us, so we consider them one of our main competitors. Right now we're jibing away because I don't want to be in phase with them at the start. I'd rather be on opposite sides of our tacks at a given point. And even more preferably, I'd like to be on starboard while they come back on port. So what we're setting up for here is to be able to come into the starboard side of the start line on a somewhat broad reach, and to basically try to find, if we can, the starboard ley line to the pin. Once we get inside of that, I come up for a quick luff to slow the boat down, and then from that point, once I know I'm in the right area of the ley line to the pin, I'm just thinking of other boats getting underneath us and pushing us up. But even so, we're within the ley line, so they can't push us up that high. Or alternatively, I don't want to be too early to the line either and have to then run down the line too far and lose our spot at the pin end. Here's Shake and Bake coming up and being my worst nightmare, getting a piece of us here from the leeward side. Thankfully, our 60-foot rig is quite a bit for them to overcome in terms of dirty air, and they don't quite pull ahead and get underneath us and push us up. Either that or they're just very nice. Here we are coming up to our start, all the boats lining up in front of us, and we're just about perfectly on the ley line for the pin, which is a little yellow buoy that you can barely see over on the right hand side underneath the boom coming up here pretty soon. This is Quiver in front of us, getting an absolutely perfect start, timing it really well. And there's the start. Pretty quickly after the start here, we realized that we're in a lane of just pure dirty air, and in general the rule of thumb is never stand to be in a lane of just absolutely dirty air. For that reason, we take a jog out to the right here and get clear air in our own lane.
That was a good tack. Oh my God.
Wow. Such a fucking beauty.
Shit came right in.
You can talk to a cab up. I'm going to be on this tack for a little bit.
I was about to do that on the other tack.
So we started, right?
Yeah.
I'll put on a little back there. That should help with you. I'm going to skip all the parts here where we go underneath the Golden Gate Bridge and then hug the left-hand shore really closely all the way into the beach to avoid some current that was coming in. And I'm just going to go right to the point where we're passing Mile Rock, which is actually one of my more favorite landmarks, probably because it looks so foreboding. But the plan is still just play the left-hand shore and get inside a little bit and avoid some negative current that we had pushing up against us. And also just to work towards the left-hand side, which is where we're going down the coast. In terms of placement at this point in time, I think that's one boat from our fleet out in front of us, but the rest of them are all behind us, still tacking up that left shore and trying to get out the gate. So we're doing very well at this point in time.
Yeah, okay. Everybody ready?
see here as we go through our tack, the one boat from our fleet that's in front of us goes with us and covers us into this side of the course. With tactical calls, so I'm asking them to make a call of when they'd like to tack back and go out again, and the response is that I should make the call of tacking whenever I get too nervous, and it doesn't take too long as the boat owner, especially when you're liveaboard and you're heading towards a pile of rocks at the end of a point, to decide maybe it's time to tack out.
Okay, tacking in 3, 2, 1.
Take them off and start like easy seatbelt. Just start tying them off. Or just soft shackle.
Take soft shackle, it's all right.
A little further along in the day now, and Ira is steering, and we're on our reach over to Pilar Point. Our tactical call here is to actually try to get a little bit further offshore than everybody else in our fleet, so that we might be able to get to a wind gradient slightly earlier. We were looking for a gradient up to about 15 to 17 knots before we tried to turn left further. And we actually reached that gradient pretty quickly without having to go too far offshore. And then, other than that, we were just trying to position ourselves outside of everybody so that we would hopefully be the first to set the kite, which we were. And it helps a lot to have a reaching kite, which allows us to hold this angle really, really easily with a masthead kite. At this point in the race, especially because this boat, the J133, loves reaching, we've pulled out ahead of the entire fleet that we're up against. And we're feeling pretty good about ourselves. As you can see here, though, this is Wildcard out in front of us. Once we got everybody with their kites up and in a decent bit of breeze, the lighter boats just take off, especially when you got a little bit of groundswell underneath them. They are able to get up to speed much faster than what we ended up calling the Magic School Bus, which is about right, since the J133 weighs about 18,000 pounds, which is the same weight as the average school bus. So here we are coming in on starboard and just itching to try to make them jibe, but Wildcard pulls it off and is able to catch a wave or two and pull across our bow and head inshore. This is one of those places where most of the fleet jibes in and goes left, and it's to get to a point that's on shore called Año Nuevo, and it's the beginning of a little bit of a series of compression zones along the points there. So not long after Wildcard had passed us, we also took our jibe inshore, and then we had found Swiftness actually on our port side here, and we lined up to do our jibe at the same time as they did theirs. Also, because we were getting into a somewhat more shallow area and it was just time to jibe. The plan here is to jibe onto starboard tack and put the pole on the tack of the kite and try as best we can to maintain speed while steering just a few degrees lower than they can with their asymmetric that they can't put on a symmetrical spinnaker pole. And for the most part, it works out. I believe they were trying at certain points to drive as deep as we are, but it's just really hard to do without a symmetrical pull that you can get that much more windage on the kite by pulling the tack to windward.
Oh my god. I don't even know how that happened. You're kind of goes deep with that. Nope. Oh. That's bad. Don't look shy. They're strong. That's that bad.
The folks on Swiftness made the right call here by driving back inshore. This is something that I'll look for in the future in races along this part of the coast. But that clearing that's occurring just past the cloud line, that's the beginning of the acceleration zone that happens just outside of Santa Cruz and feeds into Monterey Bay. A lot of the boats went back in and got that acceleration, and that's where a lot of them pulled ahead, and where I think we lost a good amount of time in heavier wind, making up more ground and closer to rumline. So you can see that cloud line extending out to the left, and we just waited a little too long and ended up doing our jibe just a little bit later than everybody else. The symmetrical spinnaker pole used on an asymmetric sail has ended up being a bit of a secret weapon for us. And it's one that we sort of end up having to use if we want to really gain distance on other boats downwind. And the reason is because this spinnaker is a masthead 2.5 asymmetrical, which means it's a bit more of a reaching sail. And so our angles, the deepest one we can steer usually with this kite is around, in normal wind at least, is around 120 true wind angle, which means that when we jibe, that's 120 on the other side as well, which means our jibe angle is also 120 degrees from port to starboard. With the pole out, we can usually drive down to a comfortable 160, 165 true wind angle, which means that our jibe angles are 40 degrees. So that's a massive improvement on just going as close as you can to dead downwind, 180 degrees on the rumline, which is what would have been the case here had the guy line that I made several days before not broken. So what happened here was that I made a guy line out of a line that I should not have made it out of, and that was a old jib halyard that had snapped twice before. And my reasoning was that I was going to use a part of the line that wasn't sun exposed, it was hidden in the mast, and so it was probably fine. And the reality of the situation was that it was just a really stupid thing to make a guy line, which was going to be under the same and probably more stress as a jib halyard, out of a line that had already snapped twice. So unfortunately, at least on this jibe, we chose not to rig the starboard guy line onto the port side, figuring that we wouldn't be on this jibe for actually that much longer, and that we would want the starboard guy line once we went onto a starboard tack.
Keep it going. Keep it going.
As you can see here, the clouds are starting to diminish a little bit, and we're starting to get into the compression zone. And we were looking out in front of us at a boat called Sir Edmund. It's a really, really cool schooner that belongs to Andy Schwank, and they're having a bit of a tough time going through their jibe, and we're wondering why. And it looks like they're in quite a bit of breeze up there, and we didn't really realize what was coming for us or what we were going for until we started getting a little bit closer to them. And as you can see here, the wind jumping from 22 to 26 and just building up from there. As we watch the wind build here, I just want to thank the amazing crew we had on board this day. Up on the port side rail, that's Ron. He was the owner of Bacchanal, another J133 that was in the bay. He's now the owner of Bacchanal, the JPK 1180 that's located in Australia at the moment. They had made an attempt at the Sydney Hobart this last year, and they were doing very well until their boom broke in some very confused seas, and they're going back again this next year, and they're going to try to win it. In front of him is Hadley. She was a late entry to the crew. She was signed up to do this race on a boat named Mudshark, and unfortunately they weren't able to do the race, and we were really, really lucky to have her on board. She was fantastic, really skilled, and a joy to sail with. In the foreground, in the orangish red sweater, that's Blake. He sails with us quite often, and it's been an absolute joy getting to know him over the past years. I think it's been several years. He's an extremely skilled sailor, and again, just a joy to be around and just spend time with. Down below is Ira, my wife, co-owner, co-captain, and Cooper, a friend from the Richmond Yacht Club, and he has he does rigging in the Bay Area and is just otherwise a fantastic sailor, really fun to hang out with and be around, and an absolute joy to have on board. So on the whole, this was exactly the crew that I would have wanted with us to go confront 30 plus knots with a giant hot pink masthead Spinnaker up, just blasting across Monterey Bay. So thank you to all of them for making this possible, and also safer than it would have otherwise been with a more inexperienced crew. So at this point, we're definitely getting into the breeze and the compression zone around this point. Several other boats have already jibed over and started heading across Monterey Bay over to Monterey. And it's just about time for us to do our jibe as well. And the thought process behind this is that the wind, generally speaking, follows the coastline into Monterey and does a big left-hand curve as it goes down the coast. So that means that on a starboard jibe, you're getting headed, hopefully, most of the way down to Monterey. I think a lot of people didn't end up seeing that curve as much the further offshore that you stayed, or the further offshore that you did your jibe. And I think we actually should have probably gone a decent bit further into the point here before we jibed over in order to get that bend that we needed to be headed all the way down to our course for Monterey. What we ended up doing here is driving over, and I think actually the velocity of the wind was high enough that it was just not making that bend as much. It was shooting straight off the point and not turning much at all. It was a pretty consistent, steady wind direction all the way past the point and across the bay. And wouldn't you know it, this is where the Insta360's battery died. So in this moment, we're into our first roundup out of, I think, only 3 that we had in the course of doing this whole race, which I think is pretty good in the course of crossing Monterey Bay in 30 plus knots. But what we ended up doing in this moment was simply deciding that rather than needing to flatten the boat out, since we're doing outside jibes, we would just blow the chute entirely and hope that it flagged in front of the boat enough that in the course of bringing it back down and under control, we could also get it through the jibe. That's what we ended up doing successfully. It worked out way better than I thought it would, especially for just an on-the-moment, audible sort of call. But as you can see here, we're successfully on the other jibe and still cruising nice and quick in 30 plus knots.
Grinding more.
Could you go take one?
Probably.
Oh man.
Here at not the right time, just stay there if you could.
Blake, how do you want to do this? You want to just like let it run around and just pull it in?
Okay, we're down at 28.
So at this point, we're talking about potentially doing our next jibe, and it's actually in the effort to find maybe a little lighter wind inside the Monterey Bay out to the port side of us. It's just something that I've learned over time that you don't always need to go for the heaviest wind speeds in order to get the best performance out of the boat. And quite honestly, 30 to 35 knots is just not what we necessarily needed in order to stay on rumline or get to the destination fastest. What we actually needed was to go inshore slightly more, closer to rumline, and if we could find a little bit lighter breeze in there, only maybe 25 knots, it would have been potentially a much more controllable situation, and potentially even closer to our destination. That said, I had been steering for quite some time at this point and hadn't been able to look at the map. And I think the other thing that I've learned is don't make decisions without basing it on decent information. And so we end up not going through a jibe here, and instead I asked Blake to go down below on his rest period and just take a look at the map and see what he thinks to make a good decision about whether we should in fact jibe in or whether we should stay out on our current line.
I saw that.
More than I want, dude.
Yeah? I would have been happy with nothing more than 16. Nothing, man. Yeah, I've been
Does
at
everybody
52.
agree that it's a good decision to do a dive? And go in and try to get some lighter air inside?
What now? I don't think
We all agree that it's a good idea.
the air is getting lighter. I don't think it's getting lighter.
No? Okay. Should we stay here?
Go that
I
way
would
to get
stay
to
here.
Monterey.
Don't you think it'll get lighter when we get a little closer to Monterey?
Maybe. That fog bank might have an acceleration zone along it, but we'll
As
see.
I
I mean,
recall,
it's getting later.
It feels to me you're at peak wind.
I mean, I haven't seen the map or anything. But why don't we ease that back out again?
Okay, we're gonna hold these for a little while.
Right there, great. And then, could you take over for Blake? And Blake, during your rest, you go take a look at the map and see what you think.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go ahead.
So Blake was able to take a short rest, and during that time looked at the map and found that we should probably continue going in the same direction for maybe another probably 20 to 30 minutes before now making this jibe back inshore towards Monterey and lining up slightly more with Monterey Point. One of the funnier things that we experienced as we went into Monterey Bay and as the evening sort of calmed the wind down a little bit because there was less thermal activity pulling the down the coast compression close to shore. We found that doing our jibes in 22 to 25 knots was actually becoming fairly relaxing. Sailing in general in 25 knots was a bit of a joy. Anything less than 30 was sort of felt very under control and very manageable. That was one of the fun parts toward the latter part of the evening, is sort of mellowing out of the wind after having been exposed to some more extreme levels of wind throughout the later afternoon. This is a notable moment in our boat's speed record history. First we dip Cooper into a wave here, and then we go for our speed record, which is now about 18.5 knots. And then, as always seems to be the case, we went directly into a roundup. Thankfully it was pretty easy to recover, and none of these roundups were all that violent. But it's always sort of annoying to have a dismount that's not always the greatest. And it turns out we didn't even need to wait till 3 in the morning to get the Monterey Bay exhale. We are going into Monterey Bay to the finish line, finding that we're basically going upwind at this point. So while you can't see much that's going on, we ended up putting the jib up, and then we have one of the most disorganized douses that I think I've ever experienced, and it's entirely my fault. Cooper was up on the bow ready to spike the tack, and Cooper asked at one point, should I spike the tack? And I'm like, yeah, sure, go for it. And turns out nobody in the cockpit was ready to receive the kite. So yeah, thankfully it was only 5 knots, but definitely one of the most disorganized douses I've ever been a part of, and yeah, entirely my bad for telling Cooper that it's time to spike the kite.
Normal douse. We'll just go through the. Sure, you can spike. Go ahead. Okay, thank you. Ours. Pull, please. Pull on the kite. Pull on the kite. I'm gonna come up a little bit. Just shoot up the wind, please. Please pull the kite, you guys. It's covered up. It's a fucking problem. Okay. Now I'm gonna come down. Turn on the halyard. Fuck yeah!
Funniest thing I've ever seen.
Beautiful execution, guys. Okay, next time let's talk about when we're spiking it.
Yeah, maybe you should let the big down one guy know you're thinking.
So I heard Shane say,
Right?
Okay, so we're all
Please have it down.
So after a very long day on the water with a huge variety of conditions along the way, we found ourselves at a dock in Monterey Bay, having some rum drinks and having some lukewarm spaghetti and meatballs. After that, we went up to the Monterey Peninsula Yacht Club to have cornbread, chili, and freshly baked cookies. Thank you so much to that yacht club for hosting this finish and making it an absolute success. It was really wonderful to come visit and spend time with you all.